Hello and welcome to episode 29 of NF Show, NF Magazine's official weekly podcast. Our episode title this week is Happy Birthday, Game Boy, because an important milestone happened in the last week, and we're going to talk about that. I'm your host, Noah, and of course, I'm not the only one here. I have my wonderful co-host, Evan, along for the ride as well.
How's it going, everyone, and how's it going, Noah?
I am doing very good. I had a nice dinner and had a little bit of gaming on my Wii U, which was a perfect preparation for this podcast to get alliterative for you.
Did you play on your Wii U gamepad while you were eating dinner?
No. Food does not mix with my video game systems. I love having people over to play games. I love eating food just as much as everybody else. But hands must be cleaned before you touch the controllers. That's just how it is.
Totally understandable.
But yeah, I have some impressions of a game that many of you have played and are fans of. I'm going to be talking about that. And Evan is going to be talking about a new game that he is playing. At least it's new for him.
No, it's not. I've talked about before. I finally picked it back up for like an hour the other day.
Oh,
we're talking.
Well, this is anticlimactic.
Yeah, we don't have to tease it. I picked up Professor Layton a bit more, just give a couple of things. But I'm finally getting back into it. It was put on the back burner for a while because of NF Magazine reviews and other games caught my interest. But Professor Layton will always pull me back. Him and Luke, can't leave them alone. And Emmy.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into that game as well. I still have to finish up Miracle Mask. But hey, who's counting as the games continue to back up in my home? But first, let's get into some news tidbits before we proceed into talking about what we're playing and talking about Game Boy. First of all, we have mentioned him in the past when we've talked about indie titles on Nintendo's eShops, and before that on the, what were they called?
WiiWare and DSiWare.
WiiWare and DSiWare stores. Dan Adelman was a major, well, he was pretty much the driving force in getting indie titles, or at least he was the main coordinating force in Nintendo staff in getting indie titles put onto those systems for the last 9 years. So he has quite the legacy, many excellent exclusive games, and also ports of games that have been on multiple systems came to our devices under his watch. And if you followed him on Twitter or if you read about him on the internet, you may remember at some time last year he made a comment about the severity of Nintendo restrictions in terms of releasing games or something like that. And then all of a sudden he just went silent on Twitter. And now, many months later, he's announced, hey, I can talk on Twitter again. And part of that arrangement is me no longer working for Nintendo of America.
It was a fantastic tweet.
Yeah, it really was. And I guess he's just being honest about what the situation is. And what's cool is he isn't leaving the indie scene, per se. He is going to be freelancing, essentially, as a consultant to help indie games get established and get out onto systems. And as he noted in a blog post over on his website, which I think is dan-adelman.com, he doesn't actually have negative things to say about Nintendo aside from that slightly passive-aggressive tweet. He said that he believes that the eShops are in really good shape. There's a whole staff of people that have worked under him and worked with him, and he feels that there are definitely fantastic people still there who are going to be taking care of it. And a lot of his primary battles or things that he felt that he wanted to fight for and that he got changed, those are taken care of. And so he leaves it feeling satisfied with what he's accomplished and also comfortable with who's there. And I'm looking forward to seeing, will we see another figure appear at all as far as Nintendo of America is concerned, as a voice, a Nintendo of American staff voice for indie titles, or will it be a lot quieter?
Yeah, and I'm glad that it was an amicable breakup, but I still think this is a huge blow to Nintendo because we don't know anyone else. We haven't heard any other indie developers point to someone. I mean, even when Dan went quiet, people would still talk about him and champion him about helping them get their games up on that service, whether it was Gaijin Games, which has changed its name, the BitTrip developers, or um, World of Goo developers, 2D Boy. They would always talk about how Dan Adelman was one of the big reasons they got on that platform. And not only him leaving, I'm sure there are people under him, but he was someone that obviously challenged the status quo at Nintendo, which we rarely hear about, and something that Nintendo desperately needs. And number two, no matter what, even though he does leave on good terms, it looks bad just from public perception because you have a guy who is actually being honest and acting like a human being and the public on Twitter and stuff that Nintendo silenced, and he admits as much. And he says that Nintendo's PR even offered to take over his account when people complained about. And that's just a scary thing right there. I know a lot of people will be like, "Oh, well, Nintendo is doing the Twitch streams and everything," and I think that is a huge positive step forward. But the people they put on there are very safe. The information you're finding is very locked down, and I think that's something people need to realize as a difference between a traditional gaming press or someone who's honest, like Dan, compared to a lot of the Nintendo PR people or Treehouse people who are just putting the most positive spin and the most vanilla stuff forward up front to the company. So I think it is a big blow. It's going to be hard to replace, but I hope Nintendo learns from this and finds someone that can be a indie person that also has a very public forward face for the company, because they need that. Every other company has that. ID at Xbox has Chris Sharla. Over at Sony, they have Shane Bettenhouse. They have a bunch of people. I can't remember the other guy's name, but they have a lot of people that are public-facing people that everyone knows. They're on Twitter. They're very vocal.
And I feel like Nintendo has perfect people for that. I mean, we saw example after example of that at E3 when we saw the Treehouse employees go out there, do interviews, talk about their work, talk about why they love their work. I felt they were really genuine, but they were also very much on point, which is I can't stand that phrase, but it's a really great way to describe that. They wouldn't say something that they felt would put their job at risk or make Nintendo feel embarrassed or nervous. And even if it's that, maybe if we don't feel like we're getting someone completely down to earth and being straight up honest, I still really enjoyed listening to them talk because they seemed sincere about what they had to say. And some of it, it could have been company line things, but it was really enjoyable. And I like the humanizing factor that just one or two personalities can give a major corporation like Nintendo, and that we see works so well for developers, publishers, and console manufacturers alike. So here's hoping that they continue to draw on their staff, because we get to see them occasionally in Nintendo Directs. We got to see them in the Treehouse live segments at E3. Do more of that, or bring up somebody that worked with Dan as far as the indie scene is concerned, and let that person go out there if they're well trained enough, and what are the corporate standards for communication. It's weird that I say that, because I personally would want someone like Dan. I want someone who I feel is not going to sugarcoat things. It's just going to be pretty straightforward and honest. But I'd still take someone who's a little bit more buttoned up versus nothing at all. So that's kind of where I stand on it as well.
In Nintendo of America, I give them a lot of credit because at Comic-Con they had another stream going. They are having more people humanizing the company. That is something that Nintendo needs. And as much as people point to Nintendo Directs be forward-thinking, it's still Iwata and Miyamoto for the most point. And there are hundreds of people that work at Nintendo, that work on games, that work on the PR, that work on localization. And Nintendo needs to show that. That's what companies do here in the 21st century, here in 2014. And they need to look less like a monolithic company and a structure, and more like a company full of different faces and different people. And I think we'll slowly see that transition, but that's going to be beneficial, especially on the indie side, where you have these people who got away from working at those companies. They want to see the human side of your console business.
Well said. We also got a surprise game announcement just during today, before we started recording this show. Renegade Kid, who makes lots of wonderful exclusive and indie titles on Nintendo platforms, both past and upcoming. They're the developer of Mutant Mudds, for instance, which I know is a recent favorite for a lot of people, and also of the upcoming Treasure Knots. Well, the company revealed that a Metroid-style game called Xeodrifter is coming to 3DS, and it looks like it comes from the Shovel Knight school of game design, in that it looks kind of like a classic NES pixel sprite-based title, side-scrolling exploration with an NES-style color palette. It was described as a limited color palette, I think, in one statement that I saw, but it's essentially NES style. What I didn't catch when I first read that announcement was that it is being developed and released in advance of Treasure Knots, which is now being put on hold. And if you were someone who pledged to NF Magazine's Year 2 Kickstarter, you might have selected Treasure Knots as a reward for one of the pledge tiers, because I did. And I'm kind of bummed to find out that I'm going to have to wait who knows how long. Now, don't get me wrong, Xeodrifter looks right up my alley as well. And I'm definitely intrigued by it. It's a sci-fi exploration game. You go from one planet to the next, and you get to choose how you go through things. And there was a little preliminary screenshot of the map, and there's about 100 different little screens that make up 5 or 6 different planets. It looks pretty cool. Maybe a little bit more familiar and traditional than perhaps what Treasure Knots had, just from my perspective. But what was your reaction, Evan, when you saw this stuff?
Well, it definitely looks like it's working in the Mutant Mudds engine, so it looks similar to kind of what Treasure Knots was often offering, as well as the Mutant Mudds, except a more limited color palette, like you were talking about, Noah. Jules, who we've had on previous podcasts and everything, and who we've talked to, said it was going to be an experience similar to Ikachan. I think I'm pronouncing that right. That's by Nicholas and by the man who created Cave Story. And my only concern is I've played that, and it was so short, and the Metroidvania concept really didn't come through because it was so short, and it was such a minuscule experience. So I'm curious to see if there's a balancing act in there, because I feel like I'm all for small experiences, a couple of hours, but I feel like when you take a game like a Metroid style, you crossed out Vania, and it's funny because Jules also in our notes said that he didn't like Metroidvania, but that does seem to be the staple name for the genre.
I'll comment on that after you're done.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Metroid did it first. It's weird that they attached the Castlevania. I have a feeling that's what you're going to say. But I feel like it needs to be a certain length to make sense for you to go back through these areas and remember them. If it's too short, it could be lacking. But, I mean, we're not even close. We have a screenshot of the game. I find the main character looks really appealing. The character's head seems to be almost half of the character's
looks like
sprite.
a dig dug.
Yeah, it's with the helmet or whatever. And there's some similarities, I feel like, between the character and Moon Chronicles, and Jules was specific to point out that there are actually no similarities. They're not connected anyway, but it could end up being a really cool experience, and it's awesome to see Renegade Kid is developing it with 3D in mind, so you're going to have the backgrounds and everything, talking about the sense of depth you'll see from the screen, which is always much welcomed on Nintendo's portable device. So I'm optimistic, and it's exciting to know that, hey, it could be coming out in a couple of months, hopefully.
Yeah, the target timeline the target release for this is 2014. I don't know if it was any more specific than that. So there are not a lot of months left in the year. So that means very soon, which is exciting.
Yes.
And to be honest, Evan, I had a similar reaction that you did when I saw the map, and I was hoping that the map wasn't showing everything that the game had to offer, because, like you said, I think I remember some people saying that Metroid Zero Mission, or maybe Metroid Fusion, was a little bit shorter. I'm not sure. When you think of Metroid games, they aren't huge, but there's a certain length that you expect from it, and I have no idea how Xeodrifter functions, but when I saw the map, and then I thought back in my mind to previous Metroid games that I've played, and even Castlevania games that I've played, the map seems smaller than those games. Now, it's an eShop title, and it may intentionally be something smaller, but as you were saying, Evan, I would want a little bit more from a game that's like that, just without knowing anything else. And so this is a completely uninformed opinion and could be totally smashed and wrong, and I may love it. I'm okay with short experiences when it's something that's really esoteric or unusual or creative, like Attack of the Friday Monsters. That's a tiny game, but I'm completely okay with that because it was so novel and fresh, and it was completely satisfying. Xeodrifter may actually be similar in its execution and the type of feelings that it leaves me with, but first thing I said, I'm like, there's not enough rooms in that map. It's like I came to the buffet and I was expecting at least 3 or 4 rows of food and an ice cream bar, definitely an ice cream bar, and then potentially some other dessert options with some cakes and pudding and definitely some sliced fruit. I would like cantaloupe and pineapple, and there's only one table of food and there's no dessert and there's not even a soup bar, which, okay, it wasn't that bad. But if I went to a buffet like that, I would totally leave and not not pay. So I'm looking forward to hearing some more impressions on what the game's like. I want to see a trailer and stuff. Maybe we'll get some cool previews on it. My fingers are crossed. I'm optimistic. It's sci-fi. It's based on Metroid. And yes, Evan, you're exactly right. Metroidvania. I've said it myself. I've written it before, but it's a Metroid game. This is more like Metroid than anything else. It's sci-fi and a side-scroller, and it's got a map. Castlevania has nothing to do with that. And as much as I love Castlevania games, and Jules, to his credit, to the defense of people who use the Metroidvania term, he said, I think it was him that said it, he cited Castlevania Circle of the Moon as an example of a game that inspired this, which did start out, in case you weren't sure what Evan was referring to earlier, it did start out as a side-scrolling remake of Moon Chronicles, and then it became its own thing, standalone from that as it was developed. So those are our reactions. We would love to hear what you think. Let us know in the comments below the video, or you can send us an email to show@nfmagazine.com. And then you think, what? Why are you saying this? Are you wrapping up? Are we jumping into feedback? No. I always like to say I want to hear what you think, especially, and when I want to emphasize that, I say how you tell us what you think. So that's what that's about. One other thing that I'm going to squeeze into the notes that I did while Evan was talking. I'm like, Evan's talking. I'm going to type something in here. I'm hosting. I'm gonna hijack some time because let's face it, Evan, we don't have a lot to talk about. But if you are a big-time gamer or someone who goes to websites that provide game news on all sorts of things besides Nintendo, you've probably heard about EA's new subscription
Wait,
program.
what's EA? I'm a Nintendo gamer. I don't know what Electronic Arts is anymore because they haven't supported our systems for over a year now, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah. Remember the good old days when we got like an exclusive version of SSX on Wii?
Yeah,
and
that was
Power Blast Tennis or whatever it was. I don't know. There was the golf.
The SSX game was like cool. They used both the cool tangent, but it used actually the motion controls of the nunchuck too. You were doing like dual hand motions. I remember like drawing a heart to do tricks and everything.
It was awesome.
That came out early in the Wii's life cycle, but I probably am technically wrong because I believe they're releasing FIFA 15 Legacy editions for the Wii and 3DS, which are basically the same games as like FIFA 13 or 14 with just updated rosters.
Well, that is one use of the word legacy. EA is certainly making a legacy for itself on Nintendo machines. But Evan and I, of course, talked about the EA Access program, and it's been really interesting to see the reactions, the apologists coming out in favor of Sony or in defense of EA. I personally think that it sounds like a pretty cool program. I would definitely give it a try. It's a very low barrier to entry right now in terms of what price points it's going to launch at on Xbox One. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, it's basically $5 a month or I think $29 a year, and you get access to games that are thrown into this vault.
The EA vault.
Yeah.
It's in the vault.
It's kind of, when I hear vault, I think of Disney Vault. Disney loves using that term, like, make sure you get this movie before it goes back in the vault again.
You don't think they thought of that? I'm sure they did. It's a clever. I feel like they, from a marketing PR standpoint, they used some clever word choice and everything. It's slick.
Yeah. If anything, EA has always been excellent at marketing, and they are launching this service with 4 different games. I think a Madden game, a FIFA game, Battlefield 4 and something else, and you basically
Oh
have.
my gosh, you forgot. It's one of your favorite games, Peggle 2.
Oh my gosh, that is one of my favorite games. How could I? Well, I was thinking like big, meaty console games, and Peggle 2. And you have full access to these games. You can play multiplayer, and then plus you get discounts on if you want to buy the game for full price or whatever. I guess digital. You get digital coupons. I guess you get discounts on the
You
first
get
games and the DLC.
it's kind of like a mixture between like a PlayStation Plus or Costco membership plus Netflix. So you're going to get whatever games are in the vault free to download, and you download them. It's not streaming like PlayStation Now. Plus you'll get a 10% discount on any games from EA as long as you buy them digitally. And I'm sure that they'll offer new benefits. But supposedly the vault will only get bigger. They have no plans to remove any games. And it's only for Xbox One. And it sounds fantastic to me. And it made Noah and I say, this is what we would love to see from Nintendo.
Yes, that was one of the first things I said.
even if it's not Nintendo doing their major retail games, I would pay $30 a year if I got access to 20 revolving virtual console games.
Yes.
Throughout the year, plus a 10% or 15% discount on virtual console games.
Yes. I agree with Evan for a change.
I feel like we were like doing a commercial like, would you want this? And you're like, yes. And it's like, well,
yes,
you're in luck, sir. But and the funny thing is that everyone got up in arms about where people were like, well, why isn't it on Sony's PlayStation 4? But no one was asking why is it on Wii U. And part of it is obviously because EA isn't offering it. But at the same time, there have been games available from EA. It'd be cool if there was some type of thing to get Mass Effect 3 and Need for Speed Most Wanted U and stuff like that. But I'm sure that EA is thinking, well, part of this is pushing people into digital sales. So we're not releasing anything in the future for Wii U or 3DS. But it is we've talked about this for Nintendo to do this on this show previously, Noah, and it's cool to see another company showing that it can be done.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's just like, why hasn't Nintendo done this? Why don't we have this on the Virtual Console?
We should have named the title Yes Man, or name this episode Yes Man, because I'm like, yes, completely agree. The inspiration is out there. Now, Nintendo, unfortunately, has to do their own thing, has to put their own little twist on things and say, oh, this was our original idea, or yeah, we did that 20 years ago first, and just do it. Please think of the children without games on their Wii U's. that's my new plea. I don't know if it'll work, but we'll see.
This is setting up, and I don't necessarily mean it needs to be exactly the same, but EA Access and PlayStation Plus and even Games with Gold on Xbox Live Gold, a subscription model makes so much sense, and it needs to happen for Nintendo in some way. And Nintendo has the best back catalog of titles to pull from. And their downloads for NES or Super Nintendo games, or even Nintendo 64 games, the download size for those is so small and so easy to download. Like, that's not a problem whatsoever, compared to a lot of people would be like, oh, I don't want to download these 10 gigabyte games. The Virtual Console games don't have that problem. And I feel like, A, it would reinvigorate Virtual Console sales in general. People would be more interested, and you want people to play those old franchises and then want the new games.
Yeah.
And then B, you have, instead of hoping one or two titles does well on Virtual Console, you have a steady stream of cash for people who sign up each year. And I would, without even probably seeing the games and Nintendo's vault or whatever, just be like, oh, Virtual Console, Netflix subscription, sign me up. Because I'm sure I'll check out one of those games each month at the very least.
I would even take it if they were rotating the games out. Now EA's launching and saying, oh, we're not going to change the games, and we'll see how long that's true or if it ever changes. But even if Nintendo said, kind of like their ambassador program, here are 10 titles. As a member of this program, you're going to get access to them, and then we're going to change it up. And they could do so many great marketing concepts and cross promotions. So I get excited thinking about it, and it's totally not potentially even fathomable. But the idea of something like that, like what Evan was talking about, just gets me excited. I would be incredibly happy with that, and I'd like my Wii U even more.
It's hopefully something we see in the future. I think if you sit down and boil it down, Noah, Nintendo has not changed their virtual console program at all in 8 years since it debuted on the Wii, on the original Wii. It is the exact same. Here's a week. Here are games. The same prices. The same formula. You could even say that it has actually been recessive in that we don't have Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis and all these other consoles anymore. Mix it up. There is so many better ways to go about the service, and I'm sure Nintendo's watching. Hopefully someone's listening.
But are they watching us, Evan? That's what's the important question.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we're definitely on their radar.
All right, so it's listed in the intro, so I'm going to talk about it here. Game Boy turned 25 years old in the last week, and
in North America, it's older.
In North America, yeah, yes. It's older elsewhere. It's yeah, you don't want to know how old. But we thought we would take a moment to just talk about our favorite memories of Game Boy. Mine are of a limited palette, so I'm going to go first. Limited palette, much like Xeoseeker. Xeodrifter. Xeoseeker is a website. Xeodrifter is Renegade Games. We were talking about that before we started the show, Evan and I, not me and Toad. We were talking about, doesn't it seem like there's a letter missing in that name, Xeodrifter? And just inexplicably, it fell out of my mouth, Xeoseeker, which is something that uses Xeo instead of Xeno, because I feel like it should be Xeodrifter.
I thought it was Xeodrifter.
Yeah, I think Xeodrifter is the name of an old game that already exists, maybe. I don't know.
Could be.
So whatever. Game Boy, 25 years old. I actually never got a Game Boy. I
thought you got a Game Boy Color.
Well, yeah.
That's a Game Boy.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about the one that's 25 years old, which is the black and white, or green and black thing.
The brick. Well, I mean, it's all part of the Game Boy. It's family. They're all together. They're all on this.
So I remember the first time that I heard of Game Boy, and if you've been listening to Evan and I podcast over the last 300 years, podcast about Nintendo, we just can't stop talking about it. I was with my mom and dad, or maybe just my mom, and we were going to Toys R Us, and I was going there to get a video game, and there was a banner hung in the window that said, "Coming soon, blah, 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 Game Boy." I'm like, what's a Game Boy? And the little tiny text that I couldn't read until I got up close to the door was Nintendo Game Boy. And I'm like, what's a Nintendo Game Boy? I had no idea. That's how different marketing was in the past, or at least how disconnected I must have been from reality, because I had not heard of it until I saw that banner, and it said it's coming in a few months. So maybe it had just been announced because it wasn't actually out in stores yet. And then, of course, Nintendo Power print magazines. Back in the day, you didn't get information instantaneously. You actually got stuff. You found out the news 2 months after the fact, after it was announced. So I think once Nintendo Power caught up with the Toys R Us announcement, I'm like, oh, it's a handheld gaming system. And I thought, I'm like, you know what? There's no way my parents are going to be down for that. And I don't think I could talk them into getting me this. And I would rather just request games on a system that I know that we'll all play. I just really hyper-rationalized the economics of it, and I frankly didn't think it looked that good. It looked like it's going to be really expensive. There's going to be a lot of batteries that we would have to buy. The games were expensive. The system was expensive at the time. And it's like, you know what? I'm happy with my NES. And as the years went on, the Game Boy continued to thrive, and it was all Tetris, 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 and then, oh, look, there's these exclusive versions of Mario games on the Game Boy. There's Mario Land. There's a different princess in them. There's a different villain, and I was like, oh, and then there's this different Zelda game that isn't on anywhere else except for Game Boy, and it made me hanker for it a little bit. But then I saw those graphics, and I thought about those batteries, and I thought of the cost that my poor family would be subjected to if I requested them. I'm like, I don't need that. And it wasn't until I was employed and working my way through college, and I had some discretionary income, which I would wantonly spend on video games, I said, oh, wow, there's a yellow Game Boy Color, a Pikachu edition of Game Boy Color, and it comes with Pokemon Yellow, and I was watching the Pokemon cartoon avidly at the time, and I said, all right, I'm finally going to try this Pokemon thing, and I'm going to get an awesome Pikachu branded Game Boy Color, and that was my first time with the system, and I think that was only a year or two before Game Boy Advance came out. I'm not sure the Game Boy Color had many years in its life cycle, so it was kind of an anticlimactic purchase, but once I got that, I finally realized, oh, this is why people like this so much. There is a lot of fun to be had on this system that has more primitive graphics than what my consoles do, and there are these exclusive experiences that I've desired but never actually gotten a chance to try are pretty cool. And even in the face of the links and the Game Gear, which seemed more seductive because, oh, they had color graphics and they were really pretty and they had backlights, the Game Boy held its own with a really solid library of titles. And I can't say I regret not getting the Game Boy because I've loved everything I've played out ever since, but I did miss out on that era of Nintendo gaming. So that's my Game Boy story for you.
Do 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 do. I got a Game Boy for Christmas when I was 4 years old, so around
Whoa.
1990, I think. I think it was 1990.
Really good that year.
I don't remember asking for it. I was a huge. I have an older brother who's 7 years older, who we had a Nintendo Entertainment System, and there's pictures of me, I think, at the age of 2, like trying to play games or whatever.
Oh, how cool!
So, I definitely was a Nintendo fanboy, so I wouldn't be surprised if my brother was like, just get him a Game Boy so he stops bothering my Nintendo. But I remember, I think there's pictures, I don't vividly remember it that young, but I remember the box has like the virtual reality kind of like hands.
Landscape, yeah.
Yeah, gripping onto it. I remember the box. And I got Super Mario Land, which I don't know if I ever beat. I wasn't very good at beating games when I was 4 or 5. I probably was like, I'm bored, next game or whatever. But Super Mario Land was one of the first games, and I also got, I don't know if I got it then, it may have came out later. I got the light screen attachment, which was actually like this contraption that you put over top of the system and then like push light down to then reflect back up, and it like magnified the screen or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The Game Boy was some. I mean, even back then, like it was back 25 years ago, but even for then it seemed to be, like you said, compared to the Game Gear and the links and stuff that came out, it was just like, oh man, these are primitive graphics and everything else. But some of my favorite games for the system, Revenge of the Gators, Pinball, I put a lot of time into, and I had Link's Awakening that I put a lot of time into. I actually sold my Game Boy at some point, and then I borrowed a Game Boy Color like you later in like 1999 or 2000, and I played Pokemon and really enjoyed it and stuff. But even though I had a Game Boy and I dealt with needing sunshine on car trips, or if it was dark, you were out of luck, and my light thing didn't work that well to even play the games, I was never crazy for Game Boy like I was the original Nintendo and Super Nintendo. And for me personally, I had a Game Boy Advance that I played a little bit more. It was until the DS, I was always more of a console gamer, but the DS was the system that made me love Nintendo portables.
Yes. I completely agree with that. I actually got a number of really novel games. I think on my Game Boy Advance, I remember being really thrilled by gimmicky games like Kirby Tilt and Tumble and Pokemon Pinball. That actually, I think, maybe that was a Game Boy Color game. And then Boktai, where it had a sun sensor sticking out over the system. And I mean, that would talk about addressing a deficiency of the system head on. You can't see the screen unless you have a light shining on it. And it's like, great, go outside with your video game machine because you have to charge up your solar power in the game in order to be able to attack monsters. But also, you need to go inside. It was really clever. I really liked that. But the DS library was the one that just took over my entire. I just created an obsession for handheld gaming for me.
One of the cool things about the Game Boy, though, was remembering that my dad would play Tetris, and I didn't really understand Tetris at that young of age, but I remember I would like lay in his lap or whatever and watch him play Tetris
Oh, how
for
cool.
hours on end. So
It was a
that's one of
bonding experience.
yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of fond memories with the Game Boy, but honestly, for me, there weren't too many games, and I'm sure that has to deal with the age I was at the time. And I
Yeah.
ended up usually wanting Nintendo or Super Nintendo games instead for Christmas or whatever. Even though I had the Game Boy, it was
Yeah.
like, no, I want Mega Man X or I want Mega Man X2 or whatever else.
Well, yeah, and those cool FX chip games, just like you can't get that on a Game Boy. I have to have the latest, the coolest experience. That's on Super Nintendo. So yeah, I was right there with you. So Evan, this is funny. We lament not having enough things to talk about in the show because summertime with Nintendo often is lacking in things to talk about, and here we are running short on time as we head into what we're playing. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy?
No, we pretty much covered it. I'm just picking it back up, and I love Professor Layton so much. I was like, oh, it's going to be hard to get into, but Professor Layton games are so easy to get back into because Professor Layton keeps a journal, and they
That's
give you a
right.
recap every time that you turn it on and whatever, and it's so user friendly that I love it so much. So I'm hoping to finally get back in and polish that game off so I can complete Professor Layton and
Forever.
in North America at the end of this month is Professor
Yeah.
Layton versus Phoenix Wright, but I think I'm going to pass. I've never played a Phoenix Wright game, but if I am, I might get the trilogy compilation that comes out this fall instead.
I am really happy to hear that. As long as you get one of those games, particularly, I think the trilogy would be a great way to go. I don't know how much you'll like it. It is a very different type of adventure game as compared to Professor Layton. It's not brain teaser based. It's more traditional, where you're exploring environments, you're looking for clues, and then there are these logic word games where you try to break people down at the stand during courtroom trial sections. I love it. I love being a detective,
I've
in real
yeah,
life and in video games. So
I don't know if I'll get that right when it comes out, but there's honestly, I thought the 3DS lineup was going to be stronger this year, and I have games I can go back to and play.
yeah,
But it's for me personally the only game. Other than that, the only game I'm really excited for. I'll consider getting Smash Brothers, but the game I'm excited for is obviously I've talked about before Fantasy Life, and that comes out next month in September.
yeah.
So I'm definitely going to get Fantasy Life, and I may wait until around Christmas time to see how my gaming backlog's going about getting Phoenix Wright trilogy, or seeing if it goes on sale early next year. So that's kind of how I'm being set up right now, and waiting for Smash Brothers like most people are. But you have something that's pretty amazing to keep you busy on the Wii U. At least in my opinion, I am a huge fan of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
Yeah, I ordered it last week. I had a little coupon or gift certificate that I needed to spend, and it was expiring, so I used it to get Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which I mentioned
Yay!
last week, and I didn't have a lot of time over the weekend, but I was able to squeeze in 45 minutes of trying it out. After I spent 15 minutes for my Wii U to update, and then the disc had to install something, it literally took 15 minutes, which was
Oh,
completely ridiculous.
do you not have your Wii U set up to update automatically when it's sleeping or whatever?
I thought that I did, but I'm not sure why
Hmm.
this happened today because I tried to start the game and it said the system needs to update before the game can update.
Uh-uh.
And so I was just like, are you kidding me? And so I did that. But then I finally got into the game and it is, as I was told and as I remembered briefly from the demo that I played last year, it's a very beautiful game. The levels are long
Yes.
and they're hard. So it's just like I've only played through the first two stages because that's all that I had the time to do. Because it just go on and on and on and on, and then I started getting a little bit picky. It's like, wait, I want to find the other puzzle piece, or I want to find the other Kong letter, and I want to see what's underwater here. And I'm still getting a little bit used to the range of attacks. I lost a lot of hearts in these first couple levels, just underestimating how long Donkey Kong's rolling attack would go. because they set you up. They're like, all right, here's where you should do a rolling attack. Here's 3 penguins walking in a row. And whoops, the rolling attack ends right before the 3rd penguin, and the penguin hits you and you lose a heart. And I did that several times. Like, come on.
You can, pro tip, you can keep tapping it to keep rolling if you have like Diddy Kong or a sidekick on you.
And I appreciate that, because I feel like a lot of what I'm experiencing so far, it's accidental. Like, it told me about rolling in the 2nd stage, and I'd been using it frequently in the 1st stage because it just happened to accidentally push the button that made it happen. And there's other things, such as when you get the final barrel, it's only up on the screen for maybe 1 second, but you can mash a button to punch the barrel and get bonus something. And I only saw it for a second, and then it was gone. It's like, oh, I guess I'm supposed to push a button there. I don't know what I'm collecting bananas for. I don't know what I'm collecting coins for. But then I did. I found out the coins was for Funky Kong, because I unlocked his little store. And I saw just how lame all of those things were. It's like, what? I can't keep any of these? It's a one-time deal? I'm like, meh. Didn't buy anything left. I bought a capsule toy. That was the one I bought. So we'll see how it goes. It's very, very early goings in a very long game, it seems like. I'm just going to let the bias be put out there right now. I think there's no way on earth that I will consider this game better than Super Mario 3D World. So don't expect that change to happen. But I am enjoying what I've played so far, even though I sent a message to him like, man, this Donkey Kong game's hard. And I knew that it was going to be hard, but just like, yeah. When it's hard in the very first levels, there's like challenges where he's like, oh, the jumping's not high enough, or I lost Donkey or Diddy Kong or Dixie Kong. It's like, it may stop me. I may get stymied. I have a feeling I'm going to reach some minecart level, and it's just going to be dead end.
What about the music, though?
The music is really great. I love how it transitions to the smooth jazz mellow music when you go underwater, and then when you come back out, it goes back to the other one. And it's lovely because you actually sent me a YouTube playlist of all of the songs. I listened to the entire soundtrack, and I loved it there. And it's just as great here, especially because unlike a Mario Kart, there's not this constant sound of engines playing over it and totally distorting any appreciation of that fantastic soundtrack. So yeah, I'm really liking it.
The one thing to note that's really cool about the game that I don't know if you've noticed yet because you've only played a couple levels, but it's split up into different islands. I think there's 6 islands in total. But the levels on each island are interconnected, basically. So, like, where you end one level and start the next is basically at a similar spot. And it's like this one cool pathway through the island that's cool. Really cool that you'll slowly pick up on. And it's... Oh, I really love Donkey Kong Country Chocolate Freeze. There is a challenge, but a lot of those items you could buy that are one-time purchases could definitely make the experience much easier if you find yourself getting too frustrated.
Yeah, I noticed that. I wonder if it will eventually trigger the collector gene inside of me, I suppose, where I'll want to go back and try to complete things. I don't know I don't know what the incentive is for collecting things yet, because I'm still so early in the game and I'm not a player of Donkey Kong Country games. But we'll see how that goes over time. That's all we have for the time we have for what we're playing, though. We have some feedback that we need to get through, both emails and comments, and I'm going to hand the reins over to Evan here after I say another reminder. Show at nfmagazine.com if you want to email in your feedback and keep it as a surprise until next week's episode, or if you want to have some back and forth with your fellow listeners or watchers, you can leave comments over on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/nfmagazine, right below the video for this particular episode. With that said, now let's turn it over to Evan and hear what you had to say about last week's episode.
So we only have one email, but it's from Tare, who has been writing in a lot with some fantastic emails, so it's exciting to get another one. And Tara says, Bravely Default is the handheld Final Fantasy game we always wanted, but never got. The endgame is very grindy and actually reminds me of Devil May Cry games where you just repeat the same stuff many times before you can beat the game. That actually put me off Bravely Default for almost 4 months before I dragged myself to beat it. Until that point, it's amazing, but after that, it's almost dire. 4 Heroes of Light was awesome, by the way. I think most people complained about how limited combat was, but it was great to have to make such concentrated decisions in every battle. It wasn't the best ever, but it was awesome and innovative. Side note, I hate both Trine games. LOL. I just don't like the character art, and the puzzles were too easy. It's a
That's fair.
bummer. I thought Trine had a pretty good challenge. I've only played the second one though. You played the first one, right, Noah?
Yeah, I've experienced a taste of both, and I actually thought that the visual design was really pretty. It was a very lush fantasy design, and the character designs didn't bother me too much, but you see them from pretty far away. So I'm not sure if I've seen them close enough to develop a more negative opinion of them.
Tara goes on to talk about music games. As for music games, let me tell you, the Theater Rhythm was a beast for me. There were 52 downloadable songs to get at 90 pence each, and I got them all. That's around 47 pounds, or that's about 80 US dollars. It took a long time to beat, but I got them all. That is the power of that game. It's atrocious, but I had no choice. Music games are brutal. There are rarely so few which are amazingly good, and the people who make them know that and cash in on it.
Yes. I've actually found that same horrible addiction on iPad. There are a number of games there that, oh, it's free, but oh, you like that, do you? Well, there's all these downloadable songs, and lo and behold, I was just buying them one after another. It is a slippery slope. That's why I definitely prefer music games that start out with a really healthy library of songs to play with, and then give you the option to expand the library, much like Rock Band and Guitar Hero did. But I'm still a sucker for music games, so I can totally relate to what Tara wrote.
Did you buy any of the downloadable games from Theater Rhythm?
No, I did not.
Okay. And are you getting the sequel?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna get the sequel, of course. Curtain call. We can always use a good curtain call.
All right, let's move on to the comments. Thanks so much, Tara, for writing in. Andy Lapp is our first commenter who says, I was playing Zelda A Link Between Worlds. Just finished the game and had a blast going through this. Love the story, the dungeon, the difficulty, pretty much everything. I am not interested in Hyrule Warriors, although it looks cool, but I am interested in Zelda Wii U, Splatoon, and Super Smash Bros. For 3DS Wii U.
Mm-hmm.
Who isn't?
Amen.
And I gotta say, A Link Between Worlds is fantastic. One of my favorite 3DS games. Andy Lapp goes on, I am not interested in the new Kirby games Don mentioned. Neither with Dimpaman, especially when you have to pay more to play it. But I like the concept of Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, probably because you can choose to buy the game instead, although the story doesn't progress unless you buy a game here and there. Rusty's Real Deal Baseball is awesome, by the way, Andy Lapp. I strongly suggest trying it out.
Definitely.
Finally, I would like leaderboards in eShop games. Like Evan said, an Ice Cream Surfer kind of looks like a pretty fun game. It's nice seeing Don on the show, and looking forward to what you guys are going to say for the next episode. Great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy.
Our next comment's from Nintendo Dude GCN, who writes in a lot, and we always appreciate it. Thanks for all of the great game impressions, Don. I have to say I was most interested in the standalone minigames from Kirby Triple Deluxe, especially Day to Day's Drum Dash. I really like the original, but it sounds like the standalone version isn't worth the time or money if I have the full retail game. Not sure if I enjoyed Kirby Fighters enough to justify me getting the standalone version either, but we'll see. As for what I've been playing recently, I'm still working on Bravely Default. I've also been playing Game & Wario, which was my platinum prize for Club Nintendo. I passed on the game initially due to many lackluster reviews, but I'm actually really enjoying the game. I love how the gamepad is used in many of the mini-games. Definitely a unique title, and I'm interested if either of you have gotten the chance to play it. Noah, have you played Game & Wario?
I haven't, and I felt like I was a short. I have been a short-lived Wario fanboy. When the WarioWare games came out, I became really obsessed with them, and I would buy anything that came out with a WarioWare title. And then I think it was the one on 3DS that just didn't do it for me, and then I just kind of fell off the wagon and haven't touched a WarioWare game since.
I don't think there's been one on 3DS, crazy enough.
Wasn't there?
There's
I thought there was
DS.
one that you can create. Am I getting that mixed up?
That's DS, WarioWare Do-It-Yourself.
Oh, okay, so yeah, that's the one I did not get then.
Okay. Yeah, there has not been on one 3DS, which is crazy. I have not played Game & Wario either. I guess I'm back and forth. I love the original WarioWare, and I enjoyed the Wii version. I thought WarioWare Touch was just okay for DS. I never played Do It Yourself, but I love the Wii version where you could have like up to 12 people with a single remote or whatever. But I chose Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D instead, even though I had played Donkey Kong Country Returns and I hadn't played Game & Wario. I was like, I love Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D too much, and I want to see it on 3DS. But I'm really glad to hear that you're liking the game Nintendo Do GCN. Our next comment is from Kasaki Project. Tongue twister there for me. Hey guys, I started Ages and I loved it. I'm about halfway through. Ages has really complex dungeons and I really like it. I think puzzles are more my thing. I also think you could check out Ages. I think you should check out Ages, excuse me. It's really fun and only $6. Also, cool to see Dawn on. Looking forward to the Hyrule Warrior impressions. So Kasaki Project has been talking about, he's been going through the old Zelda portable games, and he was trying to figure out which one to play, which Noah and I couldn't give him any good feedback on, but Don could, about, I think it's Oracle of Seasons and
Oracle of Ages.
Oracle of Ages. I was trying to remember if they're both Oracle games. So if you're curious, Oracle of Ages is the more puzzle-like game, and that's what Kasaki Project. And I think, Noah, you said you're more of a puzzle fan, so maybe that's what you should check out, because you love portable, handheld Zelda titles.
I do, and Tidman chided me for not having played it either and said that I should play Ages first. The other one's more combat-based. I'm not the biggest fan of Zelda combat, so like, well, duly noted, Tidman, duly noted.
Do you like the original Legend of Zelda?
I never really got into it. I did not like it as much as Zelda 2, which that's the one I played through. I love that one, and I don't know why. It's such an anomaly because it's unlike any other Zelda game out there. But yeah, that was the one that I got into. It pulled me in more than Zelda 1. I was too nervous with Zelda 1, not knowing. I mean, I was such a noob gamer at the time. I was just a kid. It's like, oh, I don't know which direction to go. Where should I go? There are all these hidden things that I'm missing out. I don't have time to figure out where they're all at. I'm not going to play. So, yeah.
I love the original Zelda, and it's a little more action-packed, I feel like, than other of the top-down. Which is interesting, because A Link Between Worlds felt like it had a lot of action to it, too. The fighting felt really good.
It was good.
Our final comment is from the 7th Experiment. Hi, guys. Recently, I've been playing Tomodachi Life, Kirby Triple Deluxe, and my second run-through of Fire Emblem Awakening. All are such amazing games. Fire Emblem Awakening is definitely my favorite 3DS game. The characters are just so beautifully created. I think that in honor of the newest additions to the Super Smash Bros. Roster, I will try and put in a third run through with Robin that looks like the male Robin that will be available in Super Smash Bros.
Wow.
That is true game love right there. I gotta get my first run through of the game. And your third. 7th Experiment continues saying, hearing about all the eShop games you guys discussed this week, I'm wondering if you guys ever played Nano Assault. If not, I'd recommend it. You control either a plane or a tank and shoot at enemies. It's a little microscopic world with cells, and you have to clear the cells of attacking bacteria. Might sound a little strange, but it's actually quite fun. The visuals also are quite appealing, too. So I don't know, you haven't played any of the Nano Assault games, right?
No, I remember asking you about it because it was one of the first games I think that came out on 3DS, and I said, Evan, look at those games. Look at them graphics. They're really good. I said it kind of like that. I was really impressed by the graphics.
So I have not played the Wii U one. I believe it was a launch title, Nano Assault Neo, but I have played Nano Assault, I think it was DX, the eShop version for the 3DS, and it was very average to me. It was one of the first games that I reviewed for NF Magazine and one of the first issues, too. So I thought the 3DS version was pretty average, but I've heard better things about the Wii U version, but after kind of my mediocre experience, I really don't think I can go back into that universe for me personally.
Well, and it was your impressions that turned me off from him and why I've never played it. So there you go, 7th Experiment, blame Evan.
Sure, I
agreed with him.
Onward in the comment here. or excuse me, and I hope you don't mind me asking a random question about gaming. Having been a Nintendo gamer and a musician for most of my life, I always try and pay attention to the music soundtrack within a game. I'm wondering which Nintendo game soundtracks are your favorites. Before Noah gets to answer his, because I know he's excited for that, the Seventh Experiment says, personally, I can't get over how beautiful the soundtrack for Fire Emblem Awakening is. I was lucky enough to find a download link for the full soundtrack online. I would prefer a physical copy, but they're only available in Japan. I also really love the soundtrack of Bravely Default. There were times when I just set my 3DS down to listen to the music. And finally, who doesn't love the soundtrack of the Legend of Zelda games? I enjoy hearing the different variations of recurring themes within the game, like the shop theme.
You going to say anything, Evan?
I thought you were just bursting at the seams to talk about your favorite soundtracks.
Well, I really like Seventh Experiment's choices, and much like Seventh Experiment, I definitely gravitate towards RPG soundtracks. There are so many as a kid, or when I was younger, that I loved, and I imported the CDs from Japan or through sites because I just thought they were so great. And with that in mind, I love Final Fantasy soundtracks, and I really love Castlevania soundtracks. Pretty much all of them are really good. I also love Mega Man's soundtracks. Getting specific to Nintendo, I haven't played through Bravely Default, but just in the demo alone, I'm like, wow, this music is great. I really love it a lot. And the latest Legend of Zelda, I thought also was a favorite. The soundtrack overall was really terrific. I loved the overworld music, and along those same lines, the overworld music in Spirit Tracks, which had kind of a South American pan flute vibe to it, was excellent. One of my favorite Zelda songs of all time. And most recently, I believe Mario 3D World and Mario Kart have fantastic soundtracks, and I've listened to them on YouTube because where else am I going to get them? Many times while at work. I just love having that in the background. They're terrific compositions, and that they use real musicians in many cases just adds even more to the quality and the impact of those soundtracks.
And Noah's probably the best person because, like you, the Seventh Experiment, he's also a musician. We've talked about a Noah's Minute, Music Minute, because it's always fun to hear his insights into the game soundtracks, especially for the games he's playing. For me, my favorite soundtracks from just Nintendo games, for doing specific Nintendo games, which was asked, Ocarina of Time. I love the Zelda series in general, but Ocarina of Time holds a special place in my heart. I just love the different songs in that, and Skyward Sword is definitely up there. I love the Skyward Sword theme. I also love Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which we just talked about. Animal Crossing New Leaf. I love the different tunes that play hourly, and there's also a website where I think they'll play the music from, maybe it's the 64 version. I can't remember, one of the versions where it'll play whatever music coincides with what time it is actually in your time zone, which is really great. I love the Super Mario Galaxy soundtracks. Those are really fantastic. And then I feel like I'm forgetting a couple that were on the tip of my tongue while you were going, but Animal Crossing. Oh, I do love Endless Ocean. I love like the Enya-esque. I feel like it's Enya and a bunch of artists similar to her, and it's so soothing as you just kind of swim through that. Thank you. Enya, the Endless Ocean is fantastic. That's such an overlooked game. And then Kid Icarus Uprising, I thought had a really great.
That does have a good soundtrack.
A really great soundtrack. It's really hard with Nintendo. They do such a great job with music. That's something that I feel like you can never give them a hard time about. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you for all your fantastic feedback. Noah, take it away.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and I want to hear what are some of your 25th anniversary Game Boy memories. Maybe you're like me and you actually didn't jump into the whole handheld Nintendo gaming phenomenon until a later system, or maybe you were lucky enough to jump in when the Game Boy actually came out and you were like Evan and got an incredible gift and you have some cool stories to share with us about that. Maybe you have some ideas about what Nintendo should do on a digital front along the lines of EA Access, or you have some thoughts about Renegade Kids' upcoming games? Are you bummed out about the Treasure Knots delay? Or are you so much more psyched for Zeo
Drifter.
Drifter? I was about to say Zeo Seeker again.
I know. I saw it. Mario and Luigi are not impressed behind you.
They're not. That's why their arms are crossed. So let us know what you think. Also, you can subscribe to us on either YouTube, iTunes, or you can go directly to our RSS feed over on nfmagazine.com to subscribe to us with whatever audio subscription feed that you like. We always appreciate the time you take to listen to our show and also write in. Leave us a review on iTunes. We would also appreciate that. Otherwise, we will be back next week. We look forward to hearing from you. If you want to keep up with us on Twitter, NF Magazine's official Twitter is at Nintendo Force. Evan's is at Evan Campbell, and mine is at This Is Noah. We look forward to seeing you there or back here next week. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.